Joseph Roberts online, ready to go. Now, Joseph wears many different hats. In fact, I think the most commendable one right now is that he's just done an entire night at the hospital on emergency surgery duty. So he is a qualified doctor. He's been in practice for over a decade, I believe. And at the same time, he is the man with the plan when it comes to African business, networking, overcoming the challenges, especially as diasporic Africans in the UK want to trade with the continent. And I will let you hear more about him from himself. Joseph Roberts, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Mark. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Am I able to share my screen?
Give it a go.
Let's try this. See if this works. Okay, so here we go. Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and yeah, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference. So many bright minds here, but and thank you for the introduction, Mark. Thank you also, Nigel, for the great work that you guys are doing at the Pan-African Center. So, yeah, I just wanted to call this short talk Ampersand and Amplitude, and the reasons for that will become clear. So a little bit about myself, you're probably not too keen. Let me just see if I can move this along a bit. The screen seems so frozen. 1 second. Yeah. Okay, so really that's me. I'm an African first, son, brother, husband and father, and a medical professional. As Mark intimated, I'm essentially just interested in generalization. So the broad picture, I'm interested in tech. I'm an empath, visionary, founder, and also a reluctant leader, but more than anything, I'm a concerned skeptic when it comes to Africa, really, and the current world system as we find it. So my talk really is about some of the gleanings and learnings and reflections on leading a community of diasporic investors. As I said, I'm the founding admin of the African Professionals Group on LinkedIn. And we came together because of a couple of realizations. Let me see if I can get to the next screen of technology. And so our raison d'etre was really born out of three realizations. And then the first was, let me just, someone's entering. So the first was really that respect is connected to your roots. And we saw that growing up in the West, it was like, go back to Africa was almost like an insult, right? So much so that we found people who were African didn't want to be connected to the continent, almost ashamed to call themselves African. And growing up in the UK, I found that especially in areas, if you were privileged enough to go to a good school, back in those days, that meant that you were probably the only or one of a few Africans in your school. And so go back to Africa was one of these bullying tactics. And so, and the other thing was the president of Ghana said something quite recently, that the destiny of all Africans everywhere on the planet is bound up with the continent. And so that's why we tend to use the word Africa, because that's really that's a common point. People like to use black and white, it's okay, but I think if we're talking about seizing wealth, if we're talking about changing the dynamic, you want to go back to where the wealth is deposited, the soil, right? The genesis. And that's what the African continent represents. You can go to anywhere in the world and you find any melanated person, and there's a deep connection to the continent, almost spiritual, you could say. So those are some of the reasons that, those are some of the reasons for our coming together as concerned African professionals. We were looking at, the problems that we were seeing, the media's portrayal of the African continent as, dead, diseased, or the portrayals were of an Africa in need of saving. And we've seen the famous 1981 concert by, I can't remember the name now, but of Ethiopian, and it was always of a child starving, flies flying, you could count their ribs. These are some powerful images that, people in the West know Africa for. And okay, yes, the continent has its problems, but there's so much more to the continent than just death and dying. So we wanted to change that, and we wanted to major on a few things. And the first thing we wanted to major on was economics. We felt that to really get a hold of the trajectory that Africa was going in, and to try and change that, we really needed to get a hold of our economic systems, own our supply chains, own our businesses, support our brightest minds, protect our natural resources, protect our human resources. And we feel that the most precious resource that continent has are its people. And so to protect their minds from, cradle to grave, to protect their bodies so that the investments we pour into them doesn't just get lost by, such, what would you say, a tragic life expectancy, malaria, preventable diseases, things like that. So, so that's our passion. Our passion is to see Africa restored to its former glory, to see an Africa that is revitalized, not dead, not diseased, but to see an Africa that is, pushed forward by its own progeny, its children who are awakened, unapologetic, unafraid. So let me see if I can get this to work, and if I can't, I'll just carry on. And so what I wanted to share today is just some of sort of the framework we're using and how we're thinking about the continent as a whole. But I wanted to alert you to the fact that Africa's got, the population of Africa is 1.3 billion in 2019. That's 19% of the global youth population, and it's set to double in the next 30 years by 2050. And so this so-called population dividend, where you have an age pyramid of younger people, making up the broad base, and, relatively fewer older people. Some of the writers like Vera, who works with the UN, is described as a population dividend, but it's actually a double-edged sword, because if you think about it, if you have such a huge youthful population and you don't upskill them, what you're going to get is rampant unemployment, and that is a recipe for social disaster. You will have forced migration, you will have crime, and you will have societal breakdown. But if you can rapidly upskill them, if you can prepare them to enter this digital age, then it becomes a dividend. Parents will tell you, if you school your children well and they grow up and become responsible people, the parents themselves benefit from that. So, that's one factor that's really driving what we're doing. We know that African youth are capable. We know that they're driven. We see their endeavor. We see their entrepreneurial drive, taking them across the Sahara Desert into flimsy boats. And sometimes they don't make it to Europe. We see people going to the Middle East to fall victim to a kafala system where essentially they're treated as slaves, because the law gives them the right to own immigrants. So we see that there's a hunger, there's a determination, there's a drive. We also see that there isn't always an enabling environment. So we're working to change that. And so we put out the word, say, if there were professionals out there who had the same heart, the same passion, then doing things together surely is more effective than operating in silos. There's so much need. We need to come together and pull our resources together. And so collaboration is key. Our philosophy is Ubuntu. I am because you or we are. If an African does well, it reflects broadly well on all Africans. And piece by piece, we can begin to change the narrative. Okay. Apologies, I'm not able to advance my slides. I'm not sure why.
Are you able to maybe minimize or stop your share and restart it?
Let's have a look. I think I've lost my mouse. Okay, let's try that. Okay. So, can you see that?
Not just yet.
Okay, let me just try again. Apologies for that.
There you go, you're on.
Okay, so I'll probably just leave that here because it's easier to do that way. And so we're close to about 1,000 members, and as you do, you find out what people want and you try and serve them that way. I find that's the best way to serve our community. And I mean, with most things, younger people are waking up to the fact that Africa is viable. It's not dead anymore. We've seen a huge shift when it comes to being proud of African roots. And probably this was way before George Floyd, and this was before Ghana's year of return. They certainly contributed to that mind shift, and there's a cultural revolution going on. You can sense that. And our members come from all different fields, as you can see there. Generally, Africans, doctors, nurses, typically, doctors, health professionals, should we say, lawyers, not so much finance. But I was speaking to a young entrepreneur, African entrepreneur recently, and apparently politicians and pastors are now part of that bracket. So the fast track to wealth right now is politician, pastor, not so much a doctor, certainly a lawyer. So things are changing slowly. And what people want in our communities, they want essentially wealth. We want to build wealth. There are a few key documents I wanted to bring on, but I just mentioned those and you can Google them. In 2014, a couple of guys, members of the African American community, put out a report in the Institute of Policy Studies. You can Google that. And it was called The Road to Zero Wealth. And the stunning conclusion was that if current trends, that was back in 2014, if they continued, then by 2050, around about 2050, the median wealth of the average African-American family would be zero. So let me say that again. That was a study done by 4 guys in association with some of the universities in the States. And the conclusion was, this is by the Institute of Policy Studies, and the publication was called The Road to Zero Wealth. They now have a website and loads of resources, you can check it out. And the conclusion was that if current trends back in 2013, 2014 continued, by 2050, the median wealth, not income, because Black people in the States, African Americans are making good money, but we're talking about wealth. So that implicitly implies the transfer of resources from one generation to the next. So the median wealth by 2050 and the average African American family would be 0. And so that was stunning, because the African American diaspora is the richest diaspora when we talk about the global African community. So I wonder where, you know, the European diaspora, the Middle Eastern diaspora stand. So really cause for concern, and a wake-up call for us to really start doing something. So we came up with a nonprofit called Vital Africa. And Vital Africa, really, our mission statement was to strive for economic and intellectual empowerment for our members in ways which catalyze holistic transformation for the global African community. And the reason we said that was because we wanted to create a self-sustaining model that benefits the global African community, and not just change for change's sake, but change that benefited the person on the ground, the local person on the ground. We know that as predatory capitalism so far hasn't really, we've not seen the sort of top, you know, trickling down promise that been sold to the masses. If anything, what we're seeing in the West is that the gap between the rich and the have-nots is widening, inequality is widening. So capitalism hasn't really solved that problem. And there are Africans, there are thought leaders out there who are espousing a form of Afro-capitalism that takes into account the unique challenges facing a local population. So yeah, our vision really is, you know, looking at projections, as I've intimated, seeing what the continent will need in 20, 30, 40, 50 years time, and trying to work backwards from that. We know that the world will be flocking to Africa in about, well, starting now, really, the pandemic has accelerated that. What we've seen in the business community is that the West is cooling on China. There's a geopolitical shift. And so all the big corporations are looking for the next big source of cheap labor. And they're finding, especially in the tech space, if you've been following, African youth are coming top in tech. So things like AI, artificial intelligence, all these data science competitions, we're fighting mathematics, because that's really what all these things are based on. They're coming first, second, third in global competitions. Facebook is now in Nigeria, Twitter's in Ghana, Google is setting up its AI developmental hub in Ghana. So they're all moving in. And my concern is that, yes, that's great. And for us, maybe that's validation, but I want Africans to move from being happy the globalists are moving to your community as a source of validation and saying the talent already exists. You can nurture those talents, create wealth for them, and in return, when they succeed, they will be loyal to the continent, because the people who are helping them look like them, all right? And so trying to get rid of this white savior dependency by helping our young people. So as I said, we see in Africa, there's a revitalized, and it's great. This is work that's going to be done by the young people. This is not going to take 5 years. We're talking about a generation. This is looking back at what Singapore did, 30 years ago. They looked back and they said, we're going to start from the babies. And now Singapore consistently ranks in the top 20. Singapore National University is in the top 10 universities in the world right now. And Africans are now going to the East for universities because they're so good. And this could be African in 30 years' time, but we need to work from now. We need to work backwards, really, from now. To train Africans who think Africa first, to train Africans who do not define success as being able to come to the West and join a global, transnational corporation. So challenging the mindset, shifting those mindsets is key. But it's difficult when I guess when you're older, it's easier to do it when you're younger. So the key phrase is to build the builders. That's the work that is ahead of us. And the framework is really this. It's quite simple. I call it the 3E framework: to equip, to empower, to effect. So affect the mindset, empower the skill sets. We're in the fourth industrial revolution. This is something Africans are very good at. It doesn't take too much in terms of the fields of data science and artificial intelligence. The startup capital is not great. This is something Africans are already doing, and they're being snapped up by the top tech companies. It's astonishing that our government sometimes don't realize what's going on. And, you know, as I said, we want change that benefits the local community. So you take the best African ideals and you imbibe that, you work within that framework, Ubuntu, and go back and tap into indigenous knowledge. So yeah, so that's what we're doing. We're raising awareness. We're trying to tell people that opportunities exist on the African continent for African professionals to contribute to the continent's development. We're saying that you don't need huge startup capital to create the same degree of impact. We're saying that there are lots of people like ourselves who are passionate about the continent. And we're saying that if we're strategic in our collaborations, we can create impact, we can scale our impact, and then leverage that in conversations with the powers that be. Money talks, right? Money talks. So we're building an investment community. As I intimated, and talking about the wealth gap, African Americans or Africans in the diaspora are making good money, but the issue is not about income, the issue is about wealth. And when we're talking about generational wealth, we're talking about income that's built over time and being transferred into tangible assets that have been passed down to the next generation, at least a generation or two. And so trying to increase the investment capacity of our professionals means that they can start to reap the benefits of the amazing human resources that we have on the continent. So that's where we are. And what we do is we build the builders. We find and we fund talents, and we do some humanitarian work, but we also try to shift mindsets in terms of the diaspora and say, look, you don't have to be a professional investor to invest in Africa. You're actually, when you think about it, if you're earning, the average wage in the UK is 30,000 UK pounds. That's the average in the UK. If you're earning above that, you're actually probably in the top 2% of the wealthiest in the world, globally, I'm speaking. And you can check some of these, just given there are a couple of sites you can input your annual income, and it will tell you how rich you are in comparison to the rest of the world. And if you were to put in 30, 40 UK thousand pounds as your annual salary, you'd find that you're coming in the top 2% in the world. So it's just shifting that mindset and saying, look, if you're smart enough, you can make your money work for you, but you have to be quite strategic and intentional about it. So I wanted to kind of bring that to a close, because I didn't really want to talk too much. I wanted to probably take some more questions, and I don't know if I've gone over time, probably have. But yeah, where you can find us, and obviously people find benefits in what we do, and we're growing organically. But this is sort of our Instagram page and some of the things we try and educate our young people. So we nurture African businesses via entrepreneurship training and impact investment on the economic front. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to change the mindset, the dependency mindset on governments, right? Saying to our young people, you create a job for yourself, and then you'll be able to employ other people. If our governments are failing us, And I know people like Fred Swaneker are tackling the leadership issue with the African Leadership Academy, but start from the bottom up, train them, empower them, and then just see them flourish. And I think we're making inroads, and I think the more we really focus on this, I think the greater and the quicker we'll see change happen for our community. But first of all, it has to start with the economics. Nothing happens without money. We've seen how the West is strategic. Think about the Zimbabwean situation, where Zimbabwe is now being forced to pay $3 billion because Mugabe said return land. It's a controversial issue, but the land was stolen and it needs to be returned. But how do you go about doing that? You might disagree with how he did it. That's fine. But the people who are suffering because of these sanctions right now, the ordinary Zimbabwean citizens. So I'll leave it there. I just wanted to end by saying, transformation does require a catalyst. And a catalyst essentially is a substance of different composition to its environment. And it might be spent in the process, but the evidence of its presence and effect are inescapable. So we need leaders. We probably don't need too many leaders, but we need leaders who are prepared to do the work. And there is a way where we can actually inspire and train the next generation of leaders who think Africa first. I think that's all we need. If we can get a group of young people to think Africa first, define success the African way, I think we're halfway there.